And now His Excellency will be joined by the speakers for the panel discussion. James Carafano, Senior Counselor to the President for the International Engagement and a Richardson Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He has extensive research on national security for the long-term interests of the United States. Good to have you. Zoltán Fehér, Geostrategist and non-resident fellow with the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub. Previously, he served as a professional diplomat for Hungary for 12 years at the Hungarian Embassy in Washington, D.C., and as Hungary's acting ambassador in Turkey. He's also a visiting scholar and a professional lecturer at George Washington University. Velina Tchakarova, founder and geopolitical strategist of FACE, that is, for a conscious experience at Vienna. She's one of the few hands-on analysts of international affairs, having a genuine understanding of complex system science. And Michael Wesley, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Global Culture and Engagement at the University of Melbourne, a professor of international relations with special expertise on Asia-Pacific geopolitics, security, competition, and state-building interventions. And of course, last but not least, our moderator for the panel is Viktor Eszterhai, a research fellow at the John Lukacs Institute for Strategy and Politics in Budapest.
First of all, Ambassador, thank you very much for this thought-provoking speech. I always learn a lot from your comprehensive approach. But now it's time for launch our panel discussion because we are running out, unfortunately, of time. Well, currently at the university, I'm heading an Indo-Pacific research program. And in this regard, I had a chance to meet with some of the key figures who come up with this Indo-Pacific concept in the recent years. And to be frank, I have to recognize that in many cases we use this term in the Pacific region, but the content is not completely clear. And some of these key figures even did not have the same understanding of this concept. So my first question, and I want to ask all of you to shortly provide a definition. What is your understanding of this term? Because you came from different parts of the world, and after this, we can be able to start to find the differences about our understanding on the region. And then, in your short intro, I would like also to ask you to identify what is the key issue to focus on. So, how would you identify the Indo-Pacific region, and what to focus on? What should we talk about? What should we touch in this discussion? So please, Michael, the first.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the invitation to come along to the conference. Look, I think the Indo-Pacific really started out as a term and grew in popularity probably around 2010, 2011, 2012, when it became obvious that really the strategic rivalry that was occurring primarily between the United States and China, but with other players involved, was going to be primarily a maritime rivalry. A lot of the competition was over maritime or maritime-related weapon systems, and a lot of the contestation was around the first island chain between the US Navy and the People's Liberation Army Navy. And then I think people started to think, well, it's not only the Pacific Ocean that is important here, it's the Indian Ocean as well, particularly given China's dependence on particularly energy flows that go through the Indian Ocean. Australia took it up very quickly because Australia is a two-ocean country. It's on its eastern shores is the Pacific Ocean, on its western shores is the Indian Ocean as well. So I think that's it's a maritime strategic realm. That's what the concept really does try to talk about. What is the most important axis of competition at the moment? I would say it's what I would call infrastructural competition. It's the competition between China and its partners and the United States and its partners over which country will control the commanding infrastructures of the 21st century. So they can be technology, communications, they can be trusted supply chains, There's a range of infrastructures that will be important. There's, I think, one of the most dynamic areas of rivalry is around technology and the development of technology, the growing tech separation between China and the United States. And I think so much hangs on which side comes out on top in terms of these infrastructures of control for the 21st century. That's where the real game is being played at the moment.
Thank you. Velina?
Same question?
Yeah, same question. Do you agree with this kind of geo-economist approach, or you would grab the more geopolitical element of this competition? Or it's not a competition, it's including also China.
Well, first and foremost, I look at it as a nexus between geopolitics and geoeconomics. So it's actually the first, I would argue, the first, let's say, decade where we have a nexus between economics, trade on the one hand. Think of statecraft when it comes to all the measures coming from states to inflict a pain on another state or to change a certain behavior. And then, of course, the geopolitical side, that is hard and soft security. And previously, we were sitting in one room, the security and defense experts, we were sitting separately from the trade experts or the economists. Now we have to deal with the same issues, but with different repercussions. I very much subscribe to what Michael already outlined, and I would just extrapolate a little bit more. So basically consider me in the same block, so to say, but let me just point to some specific issues that I regard equally important as a geopolitical strategist. Now, strategists tend to think in centuries. We are actually concerned with the long horizon, and in my view, the Indo-Pacific, first and foremost, very short definition where I would argue that European states to a great extent would subscribe to is basically the territory from the eastern littorals of Africa, Indian Ocean, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Western Pacific nations. So basically with, of course, some variations depending on the concrete strategy. This is the territory I consider being Indo-Pacific. Now, going to the more important part, that is how I look at this from a geopolitical and geoeconomic lens. First and foremost, I argue that the Indo-Pacific is going to be the epicenter in terms of number and, unfortunately, scale of tensions in the years to come. So it's not going to be Ukraine, it's not going to be the Middle East, it's going to be the Indo-Pacific. And the second important point, here we are. There is a merger between these security slash geoeconomic threats. As we've heard already from the ambassador, he outlined and gave us the numbers. So when we talk about the Indo-Pacific, it doesn't mean that there is not a repercussion for Ukraine and vice versa. Third important point is that I think, and I argue that we look at China either through the maritime lens or through the terrestrial lens. Think of BRI. But the way I look at it is a hybrid form, something that we have never witnessed before. Hybrid form of maritime and terrestrial expansion. So they took the best from both worlds. They took the best from the maritime Anglo-Saxon strategy from the last 250 years, and they want to bring it to another scale. And at the same time, they took the best from the Soviet terrestrial strategy in the Eurasian, Arctic, Eastern European terrain, and now they want to also bring it to the next scale. And here I come to the next point. Through what exactly? Through this unique modus operandi of strategic coordination in all systemically relevant domains between Beijing and Moscow. Something absolutely unique, never happened before, at that scale, to that extent, so we don't know what we are dealing with. And I think that they do not know either. But the point is that it's wrong for you to look at what's happening right now in the fourth year of the Russian war against Ukraine as a consequence. So basically, China had to step in and support Moscow after Moscow had launched the full-scale war. It's wrong. The one preceded the other as a phenomenon. And I argue that the Dragon Bear modus operandi is going to be a threat multiplier, specifically for the Indo-Pacific. Why? The case for anti-NATO in Asia, so basically no Asian NATO should ever emerge with now the key partners and allies in the Indo-Pacific. Second important point, the facilitation of an alternative supply chain in the Indo-Pacific that is in the Arctic, facilitated by China and Russia, deliberately steered and now manifested. Why? Because it's not going to be controlled by the United States and the partners, and is going to practically deliver an alternative to China in the case that relations with the Americans become really, really tense. Whether it's about Taiwan, whether it's about South Korea, North Korea, whether it's about South China, East China. So because we are dealing also with trilemma, and all of these three terrains are also coming together. And again, going back to the European response to that, because of course now as an European, I'm thinking myself, what are we going to do and how are we going to react once all of this is manifested? And I fear that we are going to be very much outraged. I can assure you of that. We are going to be diplomatically quite actively outraged, but nothing of substance will come out in terms of a collective strategic response to these three dimensions of a threat multiplier in the Indo-Pacific, considering North Korea, considering the South China Sea, think of Philippines and the other neighbors of China, and considering, of course, what I describe as a death by thousand cuts approach by China to Taiwan. That is slow but steady and persistent penetration of the social fabric, the economic model, and most importantly, the democratic process in Taiwan. So yes, military attack, we can discuss that as well, is an option. Yes, the readiness is now ongoing on behalf of China, and they, I'm quite certain, will achieve a level of readiness by 2027. But this death by thousand cuts, copy-pasted from the time of the Soviet Union, the collaboration and the deep coordination with the Russians in all layers, from commodities, energy, trade, economy, technology, military domain, space, and then supply chains. All of this is happening simultaneously, and I fear that we are just too overwhelmed, given our democratic processes, and given how spread and how distracted our decision makers are, specifically in Europe. We have, of course, our American colleague, he will say about Trump 2.0. So in a sense, we will be quite overwhelmed by what is about to happen. And most importantly, final remark on my side, think of the legacy from the inauguration speech by Trump. He said he wants two ceasefires, right, in Middle East and in Ukraine. Now think about how any series of tensions in the Indo-Pacific will actually coin Trump as a warmonger president. From the perspective of China and Russia, you need to also think of who is winning the narrative and, of course, the battle of hearts and minds. This has an ideological layer as well. It doesn't only consider geoeconomics and geopolitics.
Thank you. Zoltán, how would you describe your description?
Oh, it's on. Well, first of all, thank you to Ambassador Samerkegyi and the Equilibrium Institute for this kind invitation. It's always a pleasure to speak here in my hometown and travel here from Washington, D.C., where we're very much focused on the Indo-Pacific and also the interlinkages between U.S. strategy and European strategy concerning the Indo-Pacific. And the way the organizers framed the question, the way I've just framed this intro, shows how interconnected these three regions, North America, the European region, and the Indo-Pacific are. But what is the Indo-Pacific, Viktor, you asked? And I agree with Michael's geographic definition, and I also join Polina's approach on connecting geopolitics with geoeconomics. I would also bring in geostrategy. I think we need to bring that perspective in. And I would say that the Indo-Pacific is the region where the greatest geopolitical competition of our time takes place currently. That's my definition, that's my focus. What is at the root of that competition? We're fortunate to have with us the representative of the Trump administration, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, who happens to be a friend from over 20 years ago when we both lived here, and he sets quite a few important things about China and the Indo-Pacific. One of the things he said is the primary threat to the West is China. And I couldn't agree with that more. I think China poses a great challenge to not just the United States. It's a unique challenge to the United States because China is a peer competitor that wants to be on the same footing with the United States and possibly topple the United States from that top position. It's a great power competitor, so that's a unique competition, a unique challenge. But I also believe that China poses great strategic and competitiveness competitions, rivalries, challenges to the European Union and also to our allies in the Indo-Pacific. But China is not alone. On my recent trip to Taiwan, I kept hearing my interlocutors referring to an abbreviation CRINC. And after the second time I heard it, I said, well, okay, what is CRINC? What the hell is CRINC? Well, CRINC is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, because we keep bumping, whether we're Americans or Indo-Pacific allies or Europeans, we keep bumping into the same adversary. And, the past couple of months, especially the past couple of weeks, have shown that that's actually very, very true in our neighborhood, because we've seen several months ago, and Ambassador, you mentioned, North Korean troops, and staggering numbers that you mentioned, 4,000 dead in Ukraine out of 12,000 in total. Well, in recent weeks, we've heard reports that there are Chinese soldiers also fighting on the side of Russia in Ukraine. And so that tells us that we are dealing with the same adversary. We are actually dealing with one war in several theaters, and that calls for the coordination between our strategies. And that's the last thing that I'd like to talk about. So obviously, the United States, the European Union, or the European allies in NATO, and the Indo-Pacific allies are still very separate, independent entities having their own strategies, but we need to coordinate strategies. What is the US strategy? Well, at this point, we have to say that President Trump deserves historic credit for being the first US president in 2017 to recognize China as a strategic competitor. All his predecessors considered China officially a strategic partner, even when it wasn't anymore. Yes, China might have been some kind of a partner in the late Cold War, maybe in the early post-Cold War period. It hadn't been a strategic partner for a long time. Yet it took the election of Donald Trump for his first term for the United States to officially recognize in the National Security Strategy of 2017 that China is not a strategic partner to the West or to the United States, but it's a strategic competitor. And with that, Donald Trump did one more thing. He also shifted the strategy of engagement towards China to the strategy of balancing. And that gave great impetus to the European allies, and especially the European Union, and within EU institutions to the European Commission to start exploring the need to shift European strategy also. And that started in 2019, and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, also deserves credit for championing that and introducing the strategy of de-risking, which is very much a balancing strategy. It's very much, it's very similar, or at least it's in communication with the US strategy. So that's been going on for a while, but we are at a juncture right now. There is a drift between transatlantic partners, and that drift covers everything from tariffs to Ukraine. There's a distance being drawn between the transatlantic partners, and one of the great risks is that we lose focus of what's really important, and what's really important is our security and the challenges that we face, the challenges of the CRINC, and the challenges, the strategic challenge of China. So I think what the transatlantic partners need to do is to put aside their differences and focus on the great challenges facing them. And one of those, or the primary challenge of those, is China. And with that, we also need to coordinate those two strategies, the US strategy and the EU strategy, with our Indo-Pacific partners who have been our guests, NATO's guests, at the NATO summits for 3 years now, and we're looking forward to having the Indo-Pacific partners at the Hague summit and to continue this coordination with you.
Thanks. I have no idea what Indo-Pacific means.
Thank you.
But I will tell you.
Thank you.
But I will tell you exactly what I want it to mean. I'm so excited to be on the panel with all the cool kids.
Thank you.
I was late, which is great because this is the panel I really wanted to be on.
Sorry, I was nearly killing myself. Everybody has the same understanding,
for me,
please.
I know we're really short on time, but I'm from New York, so nobody can speak as fast as I can. For me, it's all about connectivity. The Indo-Pacific is half of the Southern Corridor. So a free and Indo-Pacific is a connectivity that connects to the greater Middle East, and particularly now with the development of IMEC and possibly other corridors, where we have this tremendous opportunity to increase the throughput, the resiliency, redundancy in supply chains, and that pours into the Mediterranean. And what's important about that is, it's not about corridors, it's about the corridors. It's not about a blood vessel, it's about the entire system. And so that links directly with the 3 Seas initiative, right, which connects North, Central, and Southern Europe. And look, I don't know about the future of the fund. That's irrelevant. It's the project. It's the idea that we have to build out this infrastructure to north, to the south, and that directly connects with the Southern Corridor. That is a tremendous opportunity, and that also links into the Middle Corridor. And so the idea of bringing Central Asia and the Southern Caucasus into the global economy. And the biggest champion for this, of free and open spaces and the Indo-Pacific, is Donald Trump. And I'll tell you why, in 3 minutes or less. No country in the world today can create a hard sphere of influence. Not the United States, not China, certainly not Russia, nobody. We are not going back to, I'm sorry, my friend, we're not going back to the Cold War because nobody has the power to divide the world. Nobody's going to create an empire like Russia or Great Britain. So if that's not an option, what does global trade, global interaction look like after globalization? So that's not an option. Isolationism is not a practical option. And the answer is building out the free and open spaces. And nobody benefits that for more than the United States, which is why the United States is going to be the greatest advocate of that. And it is actually answer to all these pearl clutchers over here, all worrying and nervous and worried about these guys. Because if you build out those corridors and empower those nations to have their own legitimacy and their own agency in deciding, you are robbing places for China and Iran and Russia to meddle. And Trump understands this. Which is, I think, something he does not get great credit for. He is not an isolationist. He's the furthest thing past the Houthis. He is not an imperialist. What he is he's actually the world's best geostrategist, because he knows that the most promising and productive future and the path forward is to link the corridors together.
Thank you. And
all right.
Ambassador, my question is...
If you don't know what IMEC is, you should not be in this room. Shame on you.
So, Ambassador, my question is that is it possible to make a secure in the Pacific region without China? Because from the South Korean point of view, that's probably one of the most important questions. And it's easy to articulate the relationship like in the Cold War style matter, but from the South Korean point of view, that's very crucial.
We wish very much, we have, will have a wonderful relationship with China, but if China shows, whatever we want to behave to us, but the problem is, China is still, influencing, through the Belt and Road Initiative, they are expanding their own influences. So that's why we are working very hard to cooperate with the European partners as well as the United States and Japan to guard against this kind of a tendency. Back to the original questions about the definition of Indo-Pacific. About 2 years ago, when we announced the first time ever our Indo-Pacific strategy, we have a huge debate with the ministry. So there are many who argue that we have to stick with the very narrow, the geographical terms. But I don't think it is a good idea. So finally, we thought that this is better for, the connection from the one point to the other, so we can work together jointly with the strategic partners. That's what we understand, kind of the Indo-Pacific. So even though Indo-Pacific located geographically, far away from Europe, but we are reaching out to Europe, and then we try to seek, some more relationship, partnership with the European countries, as well as the IMEC. He's talking about some Middle East or India, and then the new, stakeholders are all over the world. So if you can not stick with the only narrow geopolitical terms, we can talk about openly some many different issues within the framework. So that's what I understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question which also was raised one of someone in the audience. Are you sure that EU and the United States have the same interest regarding the Indo-Pacific? Because last year, the French president articulated a very different strategic interest regarding Taiwan. And they're still on the table. Of course, on the surface, everybody's happy that we are having in Europe a good Indo-Pacific strategy. But some countries openly argue that, especially like in the case of Hungary, seas are far away, Indo-Pacific region is far away. So do we have the same interest? And if not, how can the Europeans be involved? And first, I would like to ask from the two European participants in this panel. How would you describe the situation and how to bring Europe in more?
So as I mentioned earlier, I do recognize that the three actors that we're talking about, the United States, European allies, the European Union, the Indo-Pacific partners, they're all separate entities. The Indo-Pacific partners are separate countries with separate national interests. And I do believe, in realism and national interest. I think, national interests really dictate, if they're interpreted, the right way, they should dictate, foreign policy and grand strategy. So we shouldn't dismiss the fact that, we have different national interests or entity interests. At the same time, we are looking at, where the European Union is heading on China policy. I'm leading with my colleague Valbona Zanelli is also here a project with the Atlantic Council called the Geopolitics of European Approaches to China and their implications for U.S. strategy and transatlantic unity. And we sincerely hope that we can keep that transatlantic unity in the title in October when we're finishing our report. And I would love to encourage everyone in the room to join our roundtable today, where we're specifically talking about this. We've just returned from Paris and Brussels, and there's serious discussions in European capitals about a new rapprochement with China, given the transatlantic rift between the United States and the European Union. But what we've also heard from a lot of EU interlocutors was that a détente or a new deal with China is not in the interest of the European Union. We asked why. And expert after expert told us that China is not in the position to make the right offer to the European Union in economic and competitiveness terms, because China is losing right now, possibly losing the US market. So they have all these products and all this production, all this overcapacity to dump on the European market. So what we were told is that, in effect, EU interest and US interest, even though they're separate, they're very much aligned because they both face a competitiveness challenge. And that's the geoeconomics part of the conversation.
Velina, what is your take, and what kind of concrete policy should we do?
Yeah. I keep thinking of what President Valença said today. Read the times, understand the times, and we are currently...
Not the New York Times, right?
The Washington Times.
You missed
Wow.
that part. You missed that part. So my point here is that I'm a little bit skeptical that on our side of the Atlantic, we are really reading the times, that we really understand the systemic shifts. And that, of course, translates into wrong diagnosis and into wrong approach. Now, if I were to advise the European, I would start with the European Union, because you need to understand we are a very complex decision-making, we have a very complex decision-making mechanism, so we have the institutional approach, and then we have, of course, the national approaches. I will not go into the details because it was very well explained by my colleague. I would vehemently advise against the de-risking approach that the European Union is currently considering towards China, because this is equally destined to fail as what happened with the famous van der Hande approach towards Russia, which strengthened Russia to, launch what happened in 2022. It actually deepen the vulnerabilities and the dependencies. This is what is going to happen. It will have short-term gains and long-term negative implications on the whole of the continent. That's the first. So the problem here is that we, in fact, intuitively understand that we have only three options, strategic options. The one being siding with the Americans, the other being siding with China, as I said, de-risking, whatever, which by extension means also strengthening the dragon bear or crink or whatever you want to call it. And the third being strategic autonomy, which, sorry, but we've been in this, the security and defense experts have been in this field for 20 plus years, waiting for something to...
The younger ones. The older ones, 50 years
50
probably.
years, and we've been waiting for this strategic autonomy to happen. And yes, we can argue, and we've heard it today, the quality and the quantity of the changes are quite convincing, but they are not enough. So the options are reduced to either or, and this is what my friend alluded to with Cold War, which I still think is the better option than conventional confrontation between China, Russia on the one hand, and the United States on the other. But in a Cold War, Europe would be a bystander if we remain passive. We would be a bystander, and we would actually not gain and benefit from the options we have. Options being, it was mentioned, where are the strengths? To wrap it up, I'm a corridor, meaning that we have to connect to our friends, to the like-minded nations in South Asia and Southeast Asia via the Middle East. It's inevitable to happen. Second option being, we have to strengthen the eastern flank of NATO. This is where everything is going to happen in the next 10, 15 years, meaning Central Eastern Europe, connecting also with our friends now in the Nordics, and this has to be connected to the rest of the world. Third important point, the European Union can still initiate a lot of FTAs with ASEAN countries, for instance, also with India. So there is an optionality there as well. But final remark on my side, there has to be an active decision-making where we stand. Equidistance in the long term is going to put us in a corner in which nobody, neither friends nor rivals and competitors will respect us for what we have become as a continent.
Thank you. My question goes to Michael and also to Ambassador. What can Europe bring to the Indo-Pacific? What can they? So, what do you expect? And what is the foreign policy community in Australia think about the China-Russia axis? Do they need Europe to bring in to provide security to Australia?
Well, I mean, in a word, partnership and solidarity. I think we in Australia are very proud and very committed to providing support to Ukraine. And we are very happy to be aligning with Europe on supporting Ukraine. But I think Europe can do the same thing in the Indo-Pacific as well. The choices that Europe makes about issues that spiral out of the rivalry between the US and China, Europe's choices matter. They matter around technology, they matter around supply chains, they matter around a whole lot of different elements. So knowing that Europe is there and that is a set of really solid partnerships for us is really important for countries in the Indo-Pacific.
So Velina wanted us to read the New York Times, but she wants us to read Time Magazine because she keeps holding up the sign that says Time.
Time Magazine.
Super quick, the most important thing Europe can do in dealing with China is what Europe does about China in Europe, right? And it's
to invest?
Yeah, it's Europe's. I like the four no's. We all like no's. No military cooperation. No strategic dependencies on China. No ignoring China's human rights record. And no ignoring China when it does malicious activities, whether it's supporting the Russians or threatening Taiwan.
James, do you think the United States is able to communicate this very clearly to the partners?
They haven't asked me.
Wow.
But I will tell you, I mean, you know, that
so maybe that's a space to develop.
You know, that is very obviously the direction where the U.S. is headed. And I don't think anybody has said don't do any business with China, don't have any Chinese restaurants, don't create a NATO. But if we can't get the fundamentals right, we're wrong. Okay?
Sorry, Ambassador, I have to give you the last word. Okay.
By the way, this morning, Mr. Palladino and Dr. Gorka did speak very clearly about what they'd like Europe to do vis-a-vis China.
But we leave it a transactional word. Do you think that, so if the interest doesn't completely match with each other, the United States doesn't have to pay for this to Europe to bring in? So, because it seems that sometimes they're talking about values when it's their interest, but other cases...
Well, look, Europe nobody in Europe can talk about values and then say, let's do a rapprochement and do business with a country that manufactures their goods with slave labor. I mean, those are very inconsistent statements. Europe, in the end, is going to do the right thing, just like America, what Mr. Churchill said, because Europe cannot survive unless it gets serious about its own issues and about how it deals with China.
Thank you. Ambassador, last word, because to give a frame for this discussion, you started in the last. What South Korea can expect?
Yeah, I'm going to sum it up. To say that we are here as a member of IP4. Please remind us. I try to remind you that we are IP4 members. So the Korea, Japan, and Australia, New Zealand. We are reaching out to you. So hopefully we can cooperate together on various dangerous issues. So if we stand together, I think we will overcome all the challenges. That's my final moment.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the participants. And also thank you very much for the audience being here with us. Thank you.